Welcome to Dire Straits. I'm Tracy Clark-Flory.
I'm Amanda Monti.
Today, we're talking about an internet subculture known as the dark feminine, where influencers claim to teach women how to level the playing field in hetero dating and the world at large by becoming irresistible to men. Everywhere from viral TikTok videos to beauty advice in mainstream women's magazines, the dark feminine meme is spreading some troubling ideas about gender and power, and it tells us a lot about the state of heterosexuality today. Many months ago, I noticed these viral videos showing up on my feed. They're of women, mostly white women, with dark hair, red lips, and smoky eyes. They have this sort of gothic meets romantic meets glam aesthetic, and they promote something called dark femininity. Amanda, you don't really do TikTok, do you?
How does one do TikTok?
I mean, for me, it looks like, falling down the rabbit hole for hours on end. But
on the subject of dark femininity, I will go on TikTok for research, but I am not skilled in the art of checking it regularly for cultural trends. And I think you are.
I appreciate that you call it an art. I did tee up a couple videos that I wanted to show you. And this is your first time watching these, correct?
Correct. I'm going to open this one that you sent to me. Oh, God. Okay. So we have a busty woman in a black bodycon dress with long black hair who says she is the wild woman who's not afraid of the dark. Okay.
Because she is the dark, Amanda.
Oh, because she is the dark. Okay.
She is the dark.
So she's not afraid of herself.
Exactly.
That's nice.
When you are the dark, you're not afraid of the dark.
Okay. But is the dark, well, I guess we'll get into that. What is the darkness? Okay. Now I'm looking at another one. She has, I don't know, she's pretty. She has heavily lined eyes and lips. And she says, me showing up to make him obsess over me and then take away all his access to me because he took my peace and I'll never let him forget me. Oh, God. Okay. Sounds like there's a lot going on there.
I'm glad you got a little taste of it. Basically, these influencers promise to teach women how to be irresistible to men through their looks and their behavior. They use terms like man-eater, femme fatale, siren. It's very like, I'll bite your dick off, but in a sexy way, I guess.
Okay.
And so they share rules and scripts that are meant to help women get what they want from men, whether it's a date, a phone call, money, gifts, or just being treated with basic human respect in the dating world.
Those seem like very different objectives.
Indeed. Yeah, there's quite a spectrum there, right?
Like I'm down with the basic human respect, but I am very, or maybe even like a date, like you got to like earn it or,
Yeah, and a phone call. Yeah, sure.
Sure. But like I'm interested in the financial picture here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's dating advice?
So they're giving dating advice, but they're also selling a fantasy. And it's a fantasy of women turning the tables and having power over straight men. So these influencers call out men's bad behavior, whether it's ghosting or entitlement or dishonesty. They're basically saying to viewers, look, it sucks out here. Here's how to use your sex appeal to regain power.
Interesting. Okay. I feel like I've heard that sentiment before.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, if straightness is so dire, then we need to sort of like flip the tables. It also feels kind of representative of like a sense of desperation or immovability of like men's behavior.
Right. Like there's no escaping these dire straits. There's only attempting to excel individually within these circumstances, within these shitty circumstances.
Right. So there is no hope for men in this equation.
No hope. I also think it's a regressive approach to gender that's essentializing and naturalizing, both in terms of the gender binary and feminine stereotypes, but also when it comes to heterosexuality. And I think it's part of this broader trend away from collective approaches to feminism toward more of a neoliberal, individualistic approach to navigating patriarchy, which is something that I feel like you and I are often talking about.
Right. So I would imagine that like this, within this culture, there's not like a discussion of the way that men and women are socialized differently, and that like maybe we need some sort of like collective change around that. It's just sort of like, well, how do you navigate around that?
Yes, right.
So is this just a TikTok phenomenon, or this is bigger, right?
No, it's bigger. So the trend has jumped into the mainstream as a beauty and fashion aesthetic. Like Harper's Bazaar had a piece on how to tap into your dark feminine energy. In the fall, Glamour had a piece calling it a defining beauty trend. BuzzFeed even published a quiz that claims to tell you whether you have more of a light or dark feminine aesthetic.
Oh my gosh, we should take it.
Oh my God, how did I not take it before recording this?
Bonus episode.
Bonus episode. You get to find out what our feminine aesthetic is. But yeah, these mainstream articles are focused on things like how to do seductive eye makeup, but I would argue,
your power back, girls.
Yes, here's how to do a smoky cat eye. But I would argue that the underlying ethos, the gender ideology of the dark feminine, is actually being exported along with that beauty and fashion aesthetic. Though it's showing up in these mainstream venues as, you know, how to wear a bold red lip, it's also carrying with it all of these assumptions about femininity and womanhood that are part of this broader conversation or meme that's happening on TikTok. So you're seeing it imported into the mainstream via beauty advice and fashion advice, but it's carrying over all these assumptions about gender and about heterosexuality, about women and power. It's just not as explicitly stated in those venues.
Right. So just because the feminine is dark and has a cat eye and a red lip instead of like a flowing pastel prairie dress, does it mean it's like any less regressive?
Indeed. Yes. So we're going to get into all of that. But first, very important, can we read some dark feminine affirmations?
What? Where did these come from?
I pulled these from dozens of videos on TikTok just so that we could recite them to each other.
Okay. And just so I'm clear, the idea is if you are like a dark femme follower or whatever, do they have a name, these adherents, you like put these on Post-its on your mirrors? So
I have a couple things for you to read out. If you could imagine that you've just woken up and you're staring at yourself in the mirror and saying these to yourself with great conviction, that would be great.
Okay, I'll do my best. My pleasure is my priority. I reap the advantages of pretty privilege. Okay. My own validation is more than enough for me. That one's kind of nice.
I know. Well, that's the thing that's so fascinating is there's a mix of like totally very reasonable, healthy statements and then just totally bonkers stuff. Okay, here I have a couple. Let's see. I stay on his mind 24/7.
Oh my gosh.
I am magnetic and alluring. Oh, this one's my favorite. I am a mystical experience incarnate.
Wow, you are, Tracy. You are.
I feel like we're in the like therapy room on in Severance, where it's like, your Audi is a mystical experience incarnate.
Totally. I mean, do you feel better now? Like, do you feel like a mystical experience incarnate?
I do sort of feel like I stay on his mind 24/7. Like when I said that, I was like, yeah, that's right.
I do.
Yeah. How do you feel?
I mean, affirmations are like powerful, right? And but there's like a very thin line between something that you do to like talk yourself up, you know, so that you like aren't so depressed and feeling terrible about yourself because patriarchy, misogyny, and like a kind of toxic positivity that is then wrapped in this strange spirituality that is very gender essentialist.
Yeah. Like there are aspects of this that I think are great, theoretically. I like that they're kind of resisting the usual romantic narrative. They're putting women at the center of their own stories. They're talking about prioritizing your own pleasure, your own internal sense of validation and worth. Yay, we like that. That's great. But the idea that all of this is in service of making yourself more attractive to men and to then become more powerful in the world at large is, I get a little bit hung up on that piece of it.
Right. Like, how does my pleasure being my priority fit into the affirmation that he is thinking about me 24/7?
Yes.
And that my worth, whatever it is more than enough for me. But clearly not if you're waking up every morning trying to convince yourself that you're always on some dude's mind.
Mm-hmm. Right. And your pleasure is your priority, but ultimately in service of being desirable and then gaining power via men. It's pleasure as a priority in service of power through men, right?
And then male pleasure.
Right.
There's a very manifest quality to it. Do these dark feminine ladies have a vision board?
I mean, honestly, when you say vision board, that's kind of what these TikToks are. When you're bookmarking these videos and collecting their wisdom, their inspiration on a beauty and fashion front, that then becomes your vision board.
Right. And so I guess the question for me is what are you trying to manifest? Is it a husband? Is it another date? Is it just being a sex object? Or is it just, is the vision board just your sense of style? Because I guess that's fine, right? If you like dark gothy stuff that's a little hot.
There's a huge range in terms of what the actual vision or destination is, because for some women it's a very vague sense of power through being desirable that is maybe not as clarified as for some it's getting literally money and gifts or marriage, but for others it's this more abstract feeling of sexual power. And so within this world there's a lot of very regimented advice about how to dress, how to apply your makeup, and how to behave in order to be magnetic. And I wanted to dig into some of that advice. So I've teed up a couple direct quotes from dark feminine influencers for you to read.
Be mysterious. Keep yourself and your personal life a mystery. Oversharing is how you leak your energy. Okay.
I hate an energy leakage, don't you?
I mean, it's really damaging to the psyche, to the mystery, the mysterious mystery. So no memoirists, because they're oversharing constantly.
We are leaking energy all over the place.
I really thought that maybe I was a little dark. The dark feminine has high standards and clear boundaries, and she doesn't let anything, anyone, no boy, in italics, dim her light. But I thought she was dark.
Right. Doesn't she want to be dimmed? Right. I know there's a lot of weird contradictory symbolism, right? Okay, here's a couple more. Lead with detachment. You must be disciplined yourself to discipline men. Someone disrespects you in any way, they lose access to you.
There's a lot of tautologies, right? If you're disciplined, you'll be disciplined. If you're mysterious, you'll be a mystery.
Right. And there's so much about self-restraint. It feels to me like this wrangling of human emotions, keeping it all kind of tamped down so that you can be in control. And I think a lot of this very clearly feels like it's in response to women's feelings of not being in control in the dating world and of feeling like they're waiting for a text message back or they're dealing with a guy who's not very communicative. And so the way to regain power is seen as, removing yourself, not caring as much, not letting any boys dim your light. There's a lot of self-monitoring, I would say.
That's interesting. Yeah, the self-discipline makes me uncomfortable, and I'm trying to figure out why. But then I also wonder about this, well, sure, if a guy is an asshole, you should cut him off. Isn't that just sort of common hetero sense?
Right. I feel like there's a lot in here that's actually finding ways to continue to engage with assholes or the the fantasy that you could actually change an asshole into a non-asshole, that through the right series of behavioral choices or makeup or dress choices, you can transform a man into someone who's at your every beck and call, who respects you, who communicates to you, who's wrapped around your little finger.
Right. So you're like training them. Like
yes. So,
dog.
okay. So the top dark feminine celebrity role models are Angelina Jolie and Megan Fox. Obviously, both of these women are white. They have pale skin and dark hair, which makes me think of how white women are given leeway to experiment with badness, to play at darkness in a way that women of color are not, and Black women especially.
Right. Racist stereotypes by default are casting women of color as bad.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting to see these white women held up as examples of really like an eroticized darkness. And I think it's a good reminder that gender, femininity, notions of goodness are all constructed along racial lines. It's not to say that there aren't women of color who are held up as role models in some of these dark femininity videos. Beyonce is sometimes pointed to.
But it sounds like overwhelmingly the type is Angelina Jolie and Megan Fox. So the type is white.
Yep, exactly. They're just in video after video after video. Most of those videos are of them like interacting with men in pretty old movies at this point, like, 10 to 15 years old, I would say, where they're giving this sort of sultry look. And there's a lot of like kind of mythology around this idea that you can learn these tips and tricks that can make a man obsessed with you through like a single glance. You can harness these seductive powers and the world is yours. Did you have an Angelina Jolie phase? Like, did you ever have like I want to be like that when you were like a teenager?
I don't think Angelina Jolie. No.
I unfortunately did have an Angelina Jolie phase.
Oh, tell us.
So embarrassing. Why would I admit to this in public? But so I recall, and this is even worse because I was in my early 20s, when she was in the Lara Croft film, the remake.
Mm-hmm.
I had a Lara Croft action figure like in my room, like my first, post-college apartment. I had an Angelina Jolie as Lara Croft action figure displayed on a bookshelf, and it was her in like a skin tight silver suit, combat boots, a holster around her leg, a gun in her hand, looking very fierce and dangerous and sexy, very busty, very sultry. And I really did feel at that point in my life
that you were her.
Well, I wish. No, I aspired. I wanted to be, but I really at that time was very compelled by this idea of like female sexual power. Like I just was like, that's female sexual power. And I want that. This idea of being sexy and desirable, but also kind of scary and powerful, like wanting men to want you, but also be scared of you. So as much as I have a critique of this phenomenon, I also completely understand it and feel like I was there when I was in my teens and 20s.
So I had a Catwoman phase. When Michelle Pfeiffer was Catwoman. I don't remember if it was me or my sister, but one of us had like the full pleather like Halloween costume.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which we were like not old enough to be like wearing a skin tight pleather outfit, but we did, I guess. So I relate to that too, though, like this idea of a kind of sexual attractiveness that is tied to even like the edge of like violence or power, or at the very least, it seems like just hearing you talk, like it's the other side of the disempowered woman under like heterosexual relationships.
Yes.
It's like the other side of the coin.
Yes.
Right. That like, well, if I'm going to move within this economy, like I'm at least going to be like the one in charge.
Yes. So well put. So well put, because it's right. If I'm going to stay in this economy, how do I find power within it?
But what is missing there? I guess, is like the possibility that heterosexual relationships could be changed or that one could exit them altogether.
That brings me to some of this backstory to the dark feminine. Obviously, it didn't just emerge in the 2000s with Angelina Jolie. It didn't emerge, yesterday on TikTok. And these influencers, often you see them reference various myths, religions, folk tales. There's like conversation about Lilith and Kali. There's talk about witches sometimes. And there's a lot of talk about Carl Jung and shadow work.
Interesting.
Yes. The dark feminine is basically seen as the shadow side of divine femininity or feminine energy, which is this whole other TikTok trend in the realm of dating advice. And it's a more spiritualized and kind of goddessy meme. And it's linked to more stereotypical ideas around femininity, like softness, tenderness, passivity, receptivity. There's so much talk about receiving the masculine.
Oh my gosh. And some of them are even about like worshiping the cock.
Oh God.
Yes, we're going to have to do an episode on.
I guess I have not entered that side of TikTok.
Well, I think it's on Instagram.
Oh, jeez, really? Instagram's getting raunchy.
No, wow. I mean, I have seen a lot of that in this like spiritual, sexual coaching realm.
Yes.
It is that, the light feminine, cock worship stuff that we will have to talk about.
That's an episode.
One of the things that you're making me think of especially like with this drawing on Carl Jung, who like very interesting male psychology figure to draw on for this work. Mm-hmm. But I'm also thinking of like, when we were kids, like witchcraft and the craft and all the like witchy culture of the time. And like the way in which this just sort of like taps that in a new way, that kind of connection to women who have been, oppressed and abused or kind of, exploited in our culture.
Do we have to admit to our listeners that we recently had a party that was themed around the craft?
Yes, and that we also dressed up like characters in the craft.
And even worse, that I've never seen the film, but it didn't stop me from dressing up as a
Wait,
character.
You've never seen it?
No,
because we didn't actually watch it that night.
We didn't. Yeah, we were talking too much. Yeah.
What?
Amanda and I think, were like the only ones who actually dressed up in the costumes. Like we were like,
which says a
we're
lot.
taking this. Yeah, we're taking this very seriously. I had never seen the film. We were intending to watch the film, but we were like way too chatty and having fun and doing tarot readings, and we never got to it. But one of the things that we did, it was like right before the new year, and we wrote on pieces of paper the things that we wanted to leave behind in 2024 and like burned them ritualistically.
Which was lovely.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of the things were like politicians whose names you can probably guess were written on those pieces of paper, and it didn't work. Our witchcraft did not work.
We should have tried the affirmations. Maybe that would have worked better.
I don't know. Maybe it's time for the dark feminine.
Okay. Well, so given all of this, I guess I'm trying to understand. So what does dark femininity tell us then about heterosexuality today?
So much of this phenomenon is responding to straight men's shitty dating behavior. It's responding to patriarchy. These videos reference ghosting, toxic relationships, fuckboys, game playing, men pulling back in the dating process, being unreliable, being uncommunicative. Here's the book description for a dark femininity ebook. Like everyone's selling an ebook. And these ebooks are like $40. Like, wow. I don't even understand. We are in the wrong business, Amanda.
Maybe we need to produce an ebook.
Maybe we need a Dire Straits ebook.
So these are supposed to be advice. Like this is what you should do if you want to be dark feminine.
Right. If you want to dive a little deeper than the TikToks, like read my $40 dark femininity ebook, and it'll give you like the inside scoop. Here's the book description for one of these ebooks. In a world where it's become normalized for men to have power over women, it's important to learn the secrets to take that power back. And it promises the secrets of seduction, obsession, and manipulation. Another ebook asks, tired of being played by men? Looking to heal from heartbreak? Here's some relevant video excerpts that I pulled. I'll try to say this with conviction. I'm not going to ask you to stop liking half-naked pictures of women you've met on Instagram again. I'm just going to remove myself from the situation because it's not feeding my soul.
Ooh, the mix of like therapy speak with the sort of like small gestures toward like a really dark dating scene is very interesting. Right. To me, you know, like it's that disillusionment with like the apps and, you know, sort of like viral culture and like what it's done to like hetero relationships, but then also the therapy speak just like coming in strong.
Yeah. The like feeding my soul line.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And removing myself, right? It's like the boundaries speak that I'm just going to remove myself.
Totally. I know. I mean, I do find it so fascinating, like the specific material that's offered up about the state of dating today, you know, like the idea of a man who's liking half-naked pictures of women he's met on Instagram, and the examples that you're finding embedded in these videos of where women are running into frustration in their dating lives.
Right. Well, these are interesting. You want to split the bill? No, but I do want to leave and never see you again. So this is like, is this an affirmation or is this like, this is what you're supposed to say?
This is like a sample script. This is like, here are things that you should say to men if this scenario comes up.
Can we just do a whole episode on like script culture? Like, everything now is like, you need a script to manage heterosexual culture, right? Whether it's like motherhood or dating, which is kind of sad. Okay, here's another one. This is one that I thought was kind of heartbreaking in a strange way. Meet you in 30 minutes? I can't. I have yoga tonight. Like, what's sad to me is that like you need a script to be reminded that you can say that you had yoga that night.
And then there's also, it feels like so much embedded in this where it's like, it's yoga that she's doing because she's this spiritual, like enlightened, you know, being, right? It's like, oh no, I'm too busy to play your games because I'm working on my spiritual. Body. Yes, exactly.
Spiritual body.
The spiritual body.
She's not like, I can't, I'm reading critical theory tonight.
Right.
Or I'm reading about the history of feminist separatism. She's like, I have yoga.
I can't tonight because I'm opting out of heterosexuality altogether. Right. Speaking of spirituality, a lot of these videos slide between talk about dark femininity and divine femininity, different phenomena, but they're also often overlapping. So for an example, one of the most popular dark femininity accounts on TikTok posted this. If you'll read and describe this video.
Okay, so the caption is, "We love our masculine men." Heart eyes emoji. She says, "Me with the man who lets me thrive in my feminine energy because he looks like a man, acts like a man, and is all around in his masculine energy." Man, masculine. There's a lot of repetition in this culture.
And the like video is of a woman and a man like running down the beach, like happy, blissful. Yeah, he's in his masculine. That's like a very common phrase.
It seems like obviously there's sort of this affirmation of these hetero gender roles happening here, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk about polarity between men and women, between masculinity and femininity, like these opposite poles. And so it's about men and women being opposites. And obviously it's very essentializing, it's very naturalizing, not just of gender stereotypes, but also heterosexuality. Femininity is defined as being wanted by men. It is defined in relationship to heterosexuality. It's also implied that men are this way, women are that way. And it suggests that there's this like perfect spiritual harmony between men and women. And one of the undercurrents of this, I think, is the implication that if shit is fucked up in your hetero relationship, then you aren't correctly channeling your femininity. If you correctly channel your femininity, if your man is correctly channeling his masculinity, you'll be in perfect harmony. So whatever hetero disharmony that you're experiencing is fixed by leaning further into traditional roles. And then you throw in some language about energy and alchemy. It's like tradwifery for the spiritually online.
Yes. This also, I feel like, is very similar to what you see in some of this like divine feminine sex coaching stuff, right? Which is like, if you are not having a positive sexual experience in your hetero relationship, like you need to be, as you said, like more receptive, right? Like more open to the cock, right? And allow yourself to be that divine feminine creature that, your husband can like lodge his goods in.
Oh, lodge is such a sexy word. Lodge your goods. Lodge your goods in me.
Right. Lodge your goods in me. But you know what this also makes of is Patty Sanger. Do you remember her? She did the dating show.
Yes. Oh man. Yes. On
Millionaire
Bravo,
Matchmaker.
Right? Yes.
And she was like all about the like feminine and masculine energy. I mean, I feel like,
oh, fascinating.
We maybe need to go back and do a whole episode on Patty Sanger.
Oh, yes.
Because I think sometimes she would acknowledge that like men had like a feminine energy, right? But there was always that hetero union of one person in the couple needs to be feminine and one has to be masculine. And if like a woman is too masculine, then she needs like a more effeminate man and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, that's so interesting. When you were talking about lodging, I'm just going to be very
back to
hung up
lodging
on that word, but back to lodging. It reminded me because, like, as I've been researching this episode, I've been like joking with Christopher, my husband, partner, person, just be like, bumping up against each other in the kitchen, and I'll be like, I'm ready to receive your masculine. Like I'm just being totally unbearable in my like repeating of these lines to him, but in a way that is very not sexy. I don't know that there's any proper way for him to respond to it.
I'm sure he's fine with it, Tracy.
I want to receive you.
He's like, I'm ready for you to lodge.
Me to
lodge. Someone to move into the lodge. Okay, so this is all very funny, but I think that maybe where you're going with this is that there is an actually dark side to some of this.
Yes, let us stop laughing now, because some dark feminine memes have shown up in the femosphere, which is generally thought of as women's, response in kind to the manosphere. We are totally going to do an episode on this at some point. We must. But to give a broad overview, you have femcells, who are supposedly the equivalent of incels, but without the deadly violence. You have female pickup artists and dating coaches who promote ideas about how to like land a quote unquote high value male. Mm-hmm. And then you have communities like Female Dating Strategy, which is essentially the infamous red pill subreddit, but for women.
Right. And a lot of the advice in these arenas is just old school dating advice, like this idea that women withhold sex to get what they want from men. I feel like just the concept of withholding, we need to really unpack, especially when they want to get things out of like some kind of romantic commitment or they want to get commitment, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the thinking is, as we're sort of already outlining here, built on supposed, shaky notions of evolutionary psychology, which of course also feed into these essentialist notions of gender.
Yeah. And there's this big influencer in that realm who sometimes uses dark feminine principles. She's been called the female Andrew Tate. She does lack the human sex trafficking charges, though.
That's significant.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's worthy of note. And perhaps that comparison is not really apt. But she does advocate, in her own words, for a sociopathic approach to dating.
Is there any other?
She also says that she is a sociopath, like diagnosed. But the aim is manipulating men to get whatever you want out of them.
I just want to say so many things about sociopathy and men and how gender feeds. There's so much there to unpack. But you have this notion of like dark femininity that can be like a mainstream beauty aesthetic, also like a sort of viral type of dating advice, but it is also showing up in these other spheres, right, that are much more extreme.
Yeah, which actually is similar to what happened in the manosphere. We know this. Researchers know this. They've looked at how men have essentially like traveled across the manosphere, where usually they get involved in a less extreme subculture like pickup artistry. Back in the 2000s, like we thought, well, I won't say all of us, but I certainly thought there was a moment where I thought that pickup artistry back then was just kind of fun and games and like worthy of making fun of these guys. There was like Mystery with his floppy fuzzy top hat. Do you remember him?
Oh my gosh, no. Who is
Oh my god, Mystery. Oh gosh. Okay, so Mystery was a pickup artist, and he had a VH1 reality TV show where he was like teaching. He was teaching like men who were virgins, I believe, how to pick up women. And he was like very dramatic and over the top. He was like a magician. He was literally a magician. He wore platform boots and like a fuzzy top hat, and he had coal-lined eyes. It was like my God. How do you? Oh my gosh, Okay, I guess we have to do a deep dive on pickup artists at some point. So Amanda, I have to digress to tell you that I actually interviewed Mystery back in the 2000s as a little baby journalist.
Oh my God.
And the reason is that I read The Game by Neil Strauss. I read that book after a boyfriend admitted to having used it on me to pick me up. And he had a highlighted copy of it that he let me have. Like he admitted to using it on me, and then he gave me his highlighted copy. I then broke up with him, obviously, and then interviewed Mystery and wrote an article about it.
Wow. I need to know so much more about this Mystery guy. I will also, I guess you know this because I write about it briefly in Touched Out, that I also slept with somebody who was very into the game I guess it must have been, well, I think it was like late 2000s. So maybe he was like behind on his game.
He was behind, right.
And it was just like, it just was not even a thing. It was like this, that's what like, charismatic, young 20-year-olds did.
Oh, and they were all reading
just like, it was just like on his bedside, like, cool.
Without shame. Yeah. I mean, that is really like, it is really incredible to look back at that era, because I actually had this experience again and again. I interviewed, so I had that boyfriend, broke up with him, wrote that article. Mystery tried to neg me. So for listeners who don't know what negging is, I think Mystery was one of the people that developed the idea. It's essentially the idea that you insult a woman in order to make her feel like she needs to impress you and like work really hard to get your approval. And like more than once, I remember being a 20-something out, and about in San Francisco, and a guy like pulling something on me where I then went, "Oh, you've read The Game, huh?" And he's like, "How did you know?" Like, it was like this thing, like there was a period early on, especially where it was like, it felt like this closely guarded secret. The boyfriend that told me about it was like, "This is very dangerous for me to be passing this along to you." He presented it as though it were like nuclear codes. Like it was very highly sensitive material that would be dangerous if it ended up in the wrong hands.
Like women's hands, which apparently it's happened. Yeah. We definitely need to like do a deep dive on that.
Yes, we do.
Important cultural text.
So we'll put a pin in that for now. But, back then, like a lot of us were laughing at PUAs. But then the red pill happened, right? So the red pill community emerged from pickup artistry, and things got really dark with Elliot Rodger and incels, and then Trump. Trump was, first time around, really the president of the red pill, the president of the manosphere. He was the red pill gone mainstream. And so researchers have actually looked how men traveled between these communities, going from the less extreme pickup artist communities to, incels and these other more extreme and right-wing communities. All these different communities acted as stepping stones. And we're not seeing that level of violent extremism with the femosphere, but I do think it's interesting to consider how mainstream dark femininity content might lead to these more extreme communities. So like, say someone sees this glamour article and then you look up the hashtag on TikTok and then you're reading a dark femininity ebook and then you're subscribing to the YouTube channel of a woman who's giving advice on how to date like a sociopath. Again, you're not seeing the level of extremism or violence, but I do think that you can kind of be pulled in through something that feels extremely harmless, right? And not even very political. And then suddenly you're listening to sociopathic dating advice.
That is really interesting. And I do think it's an important point, though, like to underline that, like, is the level of like violent extremism, you know, as much of a danger for these like women only communities? I don't know, right? Like we don't see women committing these like mass atrocities, right? Or committing sexual violence against men at like nearly the same rates. It's really interesting to think about like what is the pipeline for this kind of culture? Right. And that's where I keep getting hung up on like, so what's the goal here, right? The goal is to keep a man. Right. The goal is to dangle your sexuality in front of a man. Is it to get married?
I think it really varies across these communities. Like, I think you have some people who are very explicitly like, especially if you look at a community like female dating strategy, there's a lot about commitment and getting a ring, right? But then you have these TikTok videos that feel like they're more so like meeting women in their dating lives where a lot of women are feeling disempowered and they're wanting to make women feel like they have power within the dating scene so that it's more on the level of, is he texting you back? Like, does he want a second date? Do you feel like you're losing your mind because you're longing and lusting after this man who's inconsistent and not very communicative? You know, it generally feels more like a day-to-day romantic survival strategy.
Right. I mean, so at the very least, the pipeline is into some or best case scenario, like some kind of neoliberal feminist ideology, right?
Yes,
that is like feminism is like an identity, and it's like it's a stylistic choice. It's like makeup and like the way that you go about texting. It's not a collective movement.
So speaking of neoliberalism, I came across a paper by this researcher, Layla Van Berge, and it's called The Dark and Divine Feminine. And she argues that dark femininity and divine femininity are, quote, deified forms of post-femininities. She calls them spiritual stereotypes and essentialized femininities. And here's a quote from her. These new femininities are constituted by the call for autonomy and self-monitoring and simultaneously features of heterosexual desirability and emotional sensitivity. So, you know how there's hetero fatalism? Should we explain hetero fatalism to our listeners?
Hetero fatalism is just this idea that heterosexuality is kind of hopeless, that there's something shameful about it, but also that there's a kind of stuckness within it and within the sort of heterosexual relations that we know today.
And so this researcher presents the dark feminine as a kind of femme fatalism. She says the dark feminine often relies on femme fatalist tropes as post-feminine figures. I mean, the academic language, we're going to have to translate, but whilst incorporating masculine traits, whilst incorporating masculine traits of individuality, rationality, emotional coldness, and detachment. Yet it does this by explicitly incorporating heteronormative, male-oriented desirability with the aim to topple this hierarchy, whilst still relying on heteronormative and traditional dynamics and aesthetics. What do you think of that? You are a feminist scholar, academic. Do you feel like you can translate that?
I thought you were going to ask me if I use the term
whilst. I wish you would. I wish you would more often.
Is the thing. I feel like what she's essentially saying is that the dark feminine is just sort of remaining trapped within these very old gendered tropes, right? Which is exactly what we've been saying, and that these old tropes are sort of patriarchal in nature, that they are hierarchical in the sense that, right, they put men sort of at the top of this hierarchy and women are still being exploited or used within this dynamic. So nothing's really changing here. It's just a different aesthetic.
I had a moment digging into all of this where I was like, is the dark feminine the new female chauvinist pig? Should we explain what the female chauvinist pig is to our Gen Z listeners?
Yes, I think we should. And also, I need a refresher.
Ariel Levy published a book, I want to say 2002-ish, somewhere around there. Female chauvinist pigs basically argued that this generation of women that was coming up online alongside porn especially, but also reality TV and all these Paris Hilton, all these this cultural ephemera of the 2000s and late 90s, that there was this post-feminist sensibility where, it was as though, all the sexual revolution was over. Mm-hmm. Feminism had won. And so now all there was to do was to go out and get yours. And that part of getting yours was that sexuality, and specifically she writes a lot about this raunchy vision of sexuality, that this was linked to power. I see a parallel here where the dark feminine likes sex. She's desirable. Men love her. She isn't used or abused. She's this perfect, agentic neoliberal subject. She gets hers. And so a perfect representative of both the female chauvinist pig and these dynamics, I would say, would be Samantha on Sex and the City. She was very much this perfect neoliberal agent. She had this famous line that I loved at the time, back when I had my Lara Croft action figure displayed. She had this line about how, if women perpetually gave men blowjobs, we could run the world. And the dark feminine is more all it takes is a glance. No blowjobs necessary.
I mean, that's at least progress.
We're making progress.
Feminist progress.
Yes. Decades later, we've made progress. We don't need to do blowjobs anymore. Now we just need to do seductive, Angelina Jolie, eye magic to seduce men.
We're being forced into motherhood, but it's fine.
Yeah.
I think we're good on the feminism front.
So if the 2000s era cool girl or female chauvinist pig was about girl on girl makeouts and strip clubs and girls gone wild, the dark feminine is about not chasing men. It's about not competing for them, but it's also totally about competing for them and getting the guy, right? There's this cool detachment and this sort of I'm working on myself and no, I can't come out right now because I have to go to yoga, but it's also all with the interest of getting the guy ultimately. And so in the midst of these growing critiques of sex positivity that we're seeing lately, or what I would actually say more accurately are critiques of mainstream co-optations of sex positivity, mm-hmm. The dark feminine it feels like an attempt at a correction. She's all the sexy parts of the cool girl or the female chauvinist pig, but without being used or exploited, because she uses and she exploits.
And that is so much of what we see, right? In these feminine empowerment tropes. Right? Mm-hmm. Is I'm going to sort of claim what has traditionally been the masculine role. Yeah. And therefore now I have power. But there's no questioning of how patriarchy and misogyny structure the very way that we think about power and sexual power mm-hmm. in particular. Right?
Right. Fundamentally, these femininities, these post-femininities, do not fundamentally challenge the gender binary, heteronormativity, traditional gender roles. They reinforce them. They make them seem natural, inevitable, even spiritual and holy. And they reinforce heterosexual power relations, right?
Right, absolutely. And I mean, as we talked about, anything that is sort of within this post-feminist realm is very much an individualistic gesture.
Yeah.
And it is that continued move away from understanding feminism as a collective struggle to really mm-hmm. transform the means of reproduction and the way that we think about gender and heterosexuality as an institution, which we'll, obviously be getting into in other episodes, questions about marriage and dating, right? It's all just seen as a self-branding technique. That's what feminism is boiled down to.
Yeah.
But there's also no discussion of any sort of feminist gesture here, right? Like this is just like how you embody the feminine.
Right. And it's almost like in place of any talk about feminism, even like a neoliberal version of feminism. You know, you have so many online communities where there's like people claiming to be feminists where, you know, I think it's questionable, but there's no mention that I've seen of feminism. Instead, in place of that, you have this sort of grasping for power, these like manipulative strategies and these, you know, tips and tricks and scripts. But I do want to bring up something important that is mentioned by this researcher, Van Berge. She writes, instead of a rejection of sexualization and feminization or reinstatement of gender roles, I rather encourage a queerer and more playful attitude with these identities over an essentialist one. And I think that's a really important distinction, like to kind of step out of this world of heterosexuality, you know, in terms of like how we're talking about femininity. And I want to quote an article from last year by Sam Menzella. Originating in working-class lesbian communities in the mid-20th century, the word femme emerged as a way to describe feminine lesbians who dated butches. In recent decades, it has evolved into a more expansive label for LGBTQ+ people who intentionally present in a feminine way. But femme identity is not a replication of societally sanctioned gender norms. Through their appearance, personal style, and mannerisms, femmes deliberately play with and refute heteronormative, cisnormative conventions of femininity. The beauty of this label lies in its explorative, malleable, and highly personal nature. A hallmark of feminist is its deliberate subversion, exaggeration, and or blatant rejection of patriarchal femininity. Femmes don't cater to the cisgender, heterosexual male gaze, and that's by design. And so I mention this because I want to make it clear that we're not saying do away with femininity or feminists or any of these sort of discussions, right? But the critique here is the way in which this isn't playful. It's not refuting heteronormative, cisnormative conventions of femininity, right? It's not explorative. It's not malleable. It's not highly personal. It is very rigid, rules-based. There's not a lot of room for experimentation, and it's all very much in service of reinforcing heteronormativity and conventional femininity.
Right. There's a lot here. I almost feel like we're on like the precipice of like another episode.
I know.
So stay tuned.
I mean, I feel like we came up with 5 different episode ideas in just the course of the conversation. This podcast is never going to end.
It's never going to end.
Well, we have come to the end of our journey into the dark feminine, but we will be diving into so many other aspects of hetero culture in episodes to come.
Clearly, we are not okay, but we'll see you next time. We won't see you because you're listening to us.
You'll hear us
They
next
always
time.
give me the giggles. Yes.